She was calm, composed, a black CEO, boarding a plane like anyone else with a first-class ticket in her name and a seat she had every right to occupy. But just 5 minutes after takeoff procedures began, something unthinkable happened. Why was Dr. Ayla Monroe, a respected business leader, asked to give up her seat for a white passenger? What was it about her presence in that leather-trimmed first row that made the crew so uncomfortable? Why did no one step in when she was publicly humiliated, escorted out? Not for safety, but to protect someone's ego. And what happened next is something the airline industry never saw coming. What if one woman's quiet refusal to move sparked a chain reaction that forced an entire company and a country to confront its silent complicity? This isn't just a story about a flight, it's about dignity, power, and how the right to sit when earned should never need defending. If you believe some stories deserve to be told, especially the ones that challenge what we've accepted for too long, like, share, and subscribe. Because today, we're not just boarding a plane, we're stepping into a movement. Let's begin. There was something soothing about the hush of first class before takeoff. The gentle hum of the engines preparing in the background, the clink of ice in a glass, the crisp rustle of magazines tucked into seat pockets. It was the kind of quiet only found in places where time seemed to pause for just a moment before departure. Dr. Ayla Monroe settled into seat 1A, right by the window, as the sun cast a soft amber hue over the tarmac at Phoenix International Airport. Her fingers brushed the edge of the armrest with familiarity. This wasn't just a seat, it was a ritual, a moment of solitude between two demanding worlds before meetings, boardrooms, keynote speeches, or policy consultations. Here, in this seat, she exhaled. Ayla was dressed in soft gray cashmere and slate slacks, elegant but comfortable. No designer logo screamed for attention. She didn't need them. Her presence spoke on its own, steady, composed, with an energy that didn't seek to dominate the space, but quietly shaped it. The flight attendant offered her a sparkling water with lime, and Ayla thanked her with a smile. She always remembered to look people in the eye. From the corner of her vision, she noticed a stir in the cabin. A woman, mid-50s, dressed in a tailored cream blazer and red lipstick that spoke of country club brunches, entered first class with confident strides. Charlotte Kingsley. Ayla didn't know her name yet, but her kind, she'd met her kind before. Charlotte looked at the seat number on her boarding pass. Then she looked up, directly at Ayla, with just enough hesitation to make her thoughts obvious. "Oh," Charlotte said aloud, "that's odd. This is usually where I sit." Ayla glanced up, puzzled but polite. 1A Charlotte nodded, lips pursed. "Yes, I always request it. They usually reserve it for me. Must have been some kind of mix-up. The words weren't aggressive, but the tone was sharp, sliced thin, almost polite enough to pass for harmless. Almost." Ayla turned her eyes back to the window. "I reserved this seat 3 weeks ago. I confirmed it again last night." Charlotte didn't respond immediately. Instead, she waved over a flight attendant, Eli Grant, the tall, clean-cut purser with a headset clipped to his collar and a pen tucked behind his ear. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," Charlotte said. "This seat is typically mine. I fly this route every month." Eli blinked, glanced at his tablet. "Seat 1A is confirmed under Dr. Ayla Monroe," he said smoothly. Charlotte's eyes narrowed, then quickly shifted. "Well, I'm sure we can find a suitable arrangement. I don't mean to cause a fuss." Ayla didn't speak. Not yet. She just breathed slow and deliberate. In her life, she had seen these dances before, the ones choreographed by quiet expectations, the assumption that space would bend to accommodate the well-connected, the wealthy, or the loudest voice in the room. But she was not moving. As more passengers boarded, the hum of conversation returned, though quieter here than in coach. Ayla kept her eyes on the tarmac, watching a ground crewman in neon orange wave his arms like a conductor. Even here, there were systems, movements, roles, everyone doing their part. And then, another voice. "Excuse me, ma'am," Eli said again, a little softer now. "Would you be willing to swap to seat 1C? It's still first class." Of course. It was the tone, gentle, practiced, that made her fingers curl slightly inward on the armrest. "I'm quite comfortable here," Ayla said evenly. "Thank you." For a moment, Eli stood in silence. Then he nodded and walked back to the galley. But Ayla could feel the shift, the eyes, the tension that slithered into spaces unseen. Charlotte, meanwhile, settled into 1C with a slight sigh, performative, loud enough to register. "Some people just don't understand tradition," she muttered under her breath, just enough for Ayla to hear. And Ayla did, but she said nothing. Inside, though, something stirred, a flicker of memory. The summer camp, where she was told the pool was closed only to see white children playing in it hours later. The school field trip, where her mother was asked, "Is Ayla your adopted child?" because her mother's skin was lighter. The restaurant where the waiter checked her ID twice before serving wine. It was never direct. It never shouted, but it always knew how to sit close. To breathe down your neck, to whisper that you didn't belong, not fully. But Ayla belonged here. She had founded Nuvance AI from her kitchen table while finishing her Curie-D in computational ethics. She had advised global councils on data bias and co-authored laws that protected marginalized communities from algorithmic harm. She paid for her ticket. She picked her seat. She wasn't moving. Just then, her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant popped up. "Safe travels. Board approved your ethics proposal. Full green light." Ayla smiled faintly. Her work was changing things, even as old structures still tried to define her place. She placed the phone face down. Let the world wait a few more minutes. The captain's voice crackled overhead, cheerful and distant. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Northwave Flight 221 nonstop service to Halden Bay. We'll be pushing back shortly." The aircraft door closed with a thud that echoed deeper than expected. The flight hadn't taken off, but a collision had already begun, and no one realized yet they weren't just carrying passengers today. They were carrying a reckoning. As the aircraft taxied away from the gate, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the soft chime of the seatbelt sign echoed overhead. Stillness returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was anticipatory, like the air before a thunderstorm. Dr. Ayla Monroe remained poised in seat 1A, her face turned toward the window, the fading glow of Phoenix casting long shadows across her cheekbone. She wasn't trying to appear composed. She simply was. It was the kind of stillness that came from years of needing to appear unmoved in the face of soft-spoken disrespect. Across the aisle, Charlotte Kingsley clinked a gold bracelet against the champagne flute offered by Eli Grant, who now moved with less confidence. His eyes barely met Ayla's anymore. Something had shifted in him, too. "Let me know if the temperature isn't to your liking," he offered to Charlotte. She smiled sweetly. "Thank you, Eli. It's lovely as always." And then she said it casually, as though it were a passing remark. "I do hope we don't let just anyone into this section now. First class should feel exclusive." Ayla didn't flinch, but in her mind, the words fell like glass shards onto stone. Not just anyone. The phrasing, too familiar. She had heard it in board meetings, in elevators, at airports, in interviews. It was never direct, just quiet enough to make her doubt herself, just sharp enough to remind her of the tightrope she walked. At the back of the first-class cabin, a younger attendant, Naomi Ellis, watched quietly. She had just joined Northwave Airlines 3 months prior, still learning the subtle ballet of high-end service. But today, something about the interaction tugged at her instincts. Naomi was biracial, raised between Alabama and Ontario, and she recognized the look on Ayla's face, calm, respectful, but not passive. A kind of grace you learn when your dignity has been tested too many times in too many rooms. She glanced at Eli, who was now leaning against the galley wall, rubbing the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. "You okay?" Naomi whispered. Eli hesitated, then shrugged, just trying to keep things smooth. Naomi narrowed her eyes. Smooth for who? In seat 3B, a tech consultant named Leo Sandoval had been listening quietly. He wasn't the type to get involved, but the tension was impossible to ignore. He noticed the subtle shift in energy when the crew approached Ayla. Not hostile, but targeted. He tapped his tablet, swiping open a notes app, half thinking of writing about it later, or maybe not. Maybe it was nothing. But the unease stayed. Across the aisle from him, Margot Pearson, a retired professor in her 70s, observed silently. She was white, dignified, and deeply principled. Her eyes rarely left Charlotte during the exchange. Margot had marched in protest during the 60s. She knew racism didn't always shout. It whispered. It smiled. It wore expensive perfume. She looked toward Ayla, who had not once made a scene. That silence spoke volumes. 10 minutes into the flight, the cabin crew began beverage service. Naomi approached Ayla's row. "Dr. Monroe," she said gently, "may I get you anything coffee, tea, something stronger?" Ayla looked up and offered a faint smile. "Just sparkling water." "Thank you." Naomi nodded, then paused, lowering her voice. "For what it's worth, I saw everything. You did nothing wrong." Ayla's expression softened, but only slightly. Sometimes you don't have to do anything wrong. You just have to be visible. That truth settled between them, as real and immovable as the fuselage that carried them across the sky. Near the front, Eli entered the flight deck briefly. When he returned, he stopped beside Charlotte's seat. "I spoke with the captain," he said quietly. "He's aware of the situation." Charlotte's voice dropped. "Too. Good. I expect it'll be addressed properly. There's an image to maintain in first class, after all." Naomi, passing nearby with a tray, heard every word. Eli nodded stiffly. "We'll handle it discreetly." Naomi returned to the galley, her hands trembling as she set the tray down. Discreet. That word stung. It was always the excuse: keep it clean, keep it private, keep the problem quiet. As the plane cruised toward Halden Bay, the first-class cabin slipped into a deceptive calm. Ayla leaned her head back, eyes half closed, but her mind wasn't resting. She was replaying the moment Eli asked her to move, not out of logistics, but out of preference, out of deference to someone louder, older, wider. She thought of her mother, who once told her at 10 years old, "Some rooms won't want you to sit." So when you do sit tall, she thought of the young interns at her company, watching her, learning from her. If she moved now, what lesson would she be teaching them? Her fingers rested on the boarding pass still tucked in the seat pocket. She hadn't said much, but she wasn't done yet, cruising at 35,000 feet. Northwave Flight 221 hummed along with mechanical precision, but inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere had fractured into silence. Not peace, just silence. The kind you get when people pretend not to be watching but can't look away. Doctor Ayla Monroe sipped her sparkling water with slow, deliberate poise, her body still but her mind churning. Her tablet sat untouched on her lap. The screen dimmed, its last open page a presentation for an upcoming equity summit in Halden Bay. The irony wasn't lost on her. Across the aisle, Charlotte Kingsley scrolled through her phone with one manicured finger, a smug half-smile on her lips, as though the minor disruption earlier had already been forgotten. For her, it was a settled matter. Her territory seat 1C was secure. The rest was noise, but it wasn't over. Not for Naomi Ellis, the junior flight attendant still trying to steady her breath as she restocked the galley trays. Not for Leo Sandoval, whose screen no longer displayed data sets but a blinking red light recording. Not for Margot Pearson, who sat stiffly, arms crossed, glancing from Ayla to Charlotte like a scholar piecing together a case study in real time. And certainly not for Eli Grant, who was beginning to feel the weight of his own actions pressing down on his chest. Back in the galley, Eli tried to collect himself. He'd been trained for difficult passengers, unexpected delays, even medical emergencies, but this wasn't that. This was a slow unraveling, a quiet indictment of a system he had long served and never questioned. And now it had a face, a name, Ayla Monroe. He hadn't expected her to stay seated. He hadn't expected her silence to be so loud. Naomi walked in, placing a tray on the counter. "You didn't have to say what you said," she whispered. "You knew she had the card." Eli rubbed his temples. "I was trying to avoid escalation." Escalation, Naomi's voice was tight. Asking someone to give up the seat they paid for because someone louder asked for it, that's already escalation. "She's not making a fuss," he muttered, "because she doesn't have to," Naomi said. "The rest of the cabin is doing it for her." In seat 2D, a stockbroker named Ron Berman leaned toward the aisle. He'd watched the exchange earlier, seen the hush fall over the crew. Now he turned to Cassandra Liu, a biotech VP in 2C. "You think she's going to sue?" he asked under his breath, gesturing toward Ayla. Cassandra glanced over, her face unreadable. "I think she's weighing something bigger than that." "What do you mean, I mean? She hasn't said a word since it happened." "That's not silence, that's strategy." Ron chuckled nervously. All this over a seat. Cassandra stared at him. "It's never just about a seat." Meanwhile, the captain's voice broke over the speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be experiencing a bit of light turbulence in the next 20 minutes. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. Thank you." Ayla didn't move. Her eyes remained focused on the invisible horizon beyond the oval window. But, inside, the turbulence had already begun. She recalled the subtle tone of Eli's voice, professional, restrained, but not neutral. "Miss Monroe, We may need to reseat you to accommodate a preferred traveler. Preferred. The word had echoed in her mind ever since. Not priority, not frequent, not elite, just preferred. A word that said nothing, yet revealed everything. Halfway through the flight, Naomi discreetly approached Margot Pearson. "Ma'am," she said softly, "would you like a warm towel or refreshment?" Margot shook her head, then looked Naomi squarely in the eye. "That woman, Dr. Monroe, she's not just a passenger. Is she?" Naomi tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "She carries herself like someone who's had to prove herself every step of the way. I've seen it before. There's steel under that calm." Naomi exhaled. "She's a CEO, tech sector, Nuvance AI." Margot blinked. "Good Lord." "And they asked her to move." Naomi nodded grimly. "That's what preference looks like, ma'am." Margot sat up straighter. "They're about to regret this." Toward the rear of first class, Leo's phone buzzed softly. It was a notification from the airline app, a message. "We appreciate your loyalty, Mr. Sandoval. Should you encounter any issues on board, please don't hesitate to inform the crew." He scoffed quietly. It was too late for subtle courtesies. He tapped open his video file again, paused at the moment Eli leaned toward Ayla, rewound, watched the exact second her smile faded. Suddenly, there was movement at the front. Naomi stepped into the aisle again, tray in hand. She stopped beside Ayla. "Dr. Monroe, would you care for a meal?" Ayla looked up. "What are the options?" Naomi glanced at her list. "We have the seared halibut with spring vegetables, or the filet medallions with truffle risotto." "Risotto, please." Naomi nodded, and her voice lowered. "I'm sorry," she said. "About earlier. It wasn't right." Ayla held her gaze. "I know, but you weren't the one who crossed the line." "No," Naomi said, "but I didn't stop it either." Ayla's eyes softened. "That's not a small thing to know the difference." In the cockpit, the captain reviewed the flight log when Eli knocked gently. "Captain Rhodes," he began. "We may have a passenger relations issue brewing." Captain Marshall Rhodes, a man in his 60s with a spotless record and an aversion to conflict, frowned. "Tell me." Eli hesitated. "It's seat 1A. Passenger Monroe. There was a miscommunication with her seating. It involved a platinum client request." Rhodes raised an eyebrow. "Was the seating incorrect?" "No, sir. She booked it. She had the card. But another passenger, Kingsley, expected the seat, and you tried to reseat the one who booked it." Eli didn't answer. The captain stood up. "Then we have a problem," he said flatly, "and not the kind Turbulence can shake off." The seatbelt sign above flickered on as the aircraft began to cut through an unexpected air pocket. The gentle dip in altitude barely rattled the first-class crystalware, but the metaphor was too on point to ignore. Inside the cabin of Northwave Flight 221, turbulence was no longer limited to the skies. Captain Marshall Rhodes stepped out of the cockpit with deliberate calm. At 6'2", with a baritone voice and 34 years of flight experience, he embodied the kind of authority that made most passengers sit a little straighter. But today, the uniform didn't quiet the storm. He nodded to Eli Grant, who stood by the galley, eyes darting between the captain and Dr. Ayla Monroe in seat 1A. Rhodes didn't need the full report, he'd heard enough, but he wanted to see the situation for himself. As he approached Ayla, He caught the subtle shift in passenger posture. Some leaned closer. Others shrank into their seats. A few tried not to look, but couldn't help themselves. "Dr. Monroe," the captain said, offering a professional nod. "I understand there's been some confusion regarding your seat." Ayla turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. Her expression was composed, but behind her eyes was a glint of steel. "There was no confusion," she said evenly. "I reserved this seat, I have the documentation, and I am a Platinum Tier member. I haven't moved because there's no legitimate reason to do so." The captain nodded. "I've reviewed the manifest. Your name's listed. I also understand that Ms. Kingsley had a long-standing expectation of this seat." Ayla's voice didn't rise, but the air chilled around her reply. "Expectations are not policy. Captain, if they were, a lot of people would be in the wrong places." From her seat in 1C, Charlotte Kingsley chuckled, just loud enough. "Some people just can't let things go." The captain raised a hand not to silence Ayla, but Charlotte. "Ms. Kingsley, please remain respectful." Charlotte's lips parted, offended that anyone, let alone a captain, would correct her, but she said nothing. Rhodes turned back to Ayla. "I assure you, Dr. Monroe, that this will be addressed appropriately. If you'd prefer, we can offer you another seat in first class with an upgrade voucher for future travel." Ayla exhaled, not out of relief, but disbelief. "So, you're offering me something I already paid for, then bribing me to forget I was wronged?" "No," he said. "I'm offering you an alternative." "I'm not looking for alternatives, Captain. I'm looking for accountability." For a moment, no one spoke. Even the hum of the engine seemed quieter. In the rear galley, Naomi Ellis leaned against the stainless steel counter, watching the silent exchange from a narrow view down the aisle. She clenched her fists at her sides. This wasn't training. This wasn't protocol. This was something far more insidious, old habits dressed up as discretion. She thought about stepping forward and about saying something, but the weight of her name badge felt heavier than usual. The fear of being labeled insubordinate, difficult, dramatic. Eli entered the galley behind her. "You okay?" "No," she said. He didn't answer. Back in the cabin, Margot Pearson couldn't stay seated any longer. She unbuckled, stood, and slowly walked up the aisle. Her steps were wobbly, but her voice, when she spoke, was clear. "Captain," she said, placing a hand on the seat back of 1B. "I've been flying for 60 years. I've watched this industry evolve, but I've also seen what hasn't changed." He looked at her. "Ma'am, that woman booked her seat. She followed the rules. If the only thing you're here to enforce is comfort for the usual elite, then you're not a pilot. You're just a steward of status." Rhodes blinked. Ayla looked at Margot. Surprised? Grateful? Margot didn't stop. "You want to de-escalate? Then start by doing what's right, not what's familiar." The cabin filled with a soft murmur, and for the first time since the conflict began, Ayla Monroe didn't feel entirely alone. In row 3, Leo Sandoval tapped his screen again and again. The footage was still uploading to his cloud drive. Every second captured the request to move, the hesitation, Charlotte's voice, Ayla's refusal. He turned to Cassandra Liu, seated beside him. "You think this goes viral?" Cassandra didn't look away from Ayla. "It already is." Captain Rhodes's face was tight. "We're at 36,000 feet. I must keep the peace. "You're not keeping the peace," Ayla said softly. "You're preserving a hierarchy." Rhodes hesitated, then straightened. "Dr. Monroe, you are within your rights to remain in your seat. No further action will be taken. I'll be filing a report on this incident myself." Charlotte scoffed audibly. Rhodes turned to her. "Ms. Kingsley, your expectations do not override policy." It was the first time Charlotte's face cracked. After the captain returned to the cockpit, Ayla finally leaned back in her seat. She didn't smile, nor did she relax completely. The fight wasn't over, but it was the first time someone in authority had stood in the way of the usual current. Naomi appeared moments later, kneeling slightly to her level. "We'll be landing in about 2 hours. If you need anything at all, let me know." Ayla looked at her. "Why now?" Naomi's eyes welled slightly. "Because I'm tired of being afraid of people like her," she whispered, motioning subtly toward Charlotte. "And because you reminded me not to be." In the dim lighting of the cabin, with turbulence behind and calm skies ahead, something profound had shifted. Not the seat, not the policies, but the people. What began as a quiet removal had become a quiet rebellion. And though Ayla had said very little, her refusal to move had spoken volumes. A storm may have passed, but the wake it left behind was still rippling through every heart on board. The gentle hum of the engines returned to its usual rhythm, and the ambient lights shifted to a calming hue. The cabin, once tight with tension, had begun to relax at least on the surface, but beneath the soft clink of cutlery and quiet conversations, something electric lingered. An unspoken realization hung in the air. The social order that typically governed luxury travel had just cracked, if only slightly. In seat 1A, Doctor. Ayla Monroe remained composed, her laptop now open. The screen glowed with lines of code and a dark mode email draft. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, unmoving. She wasn't writing yet, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she knew the moment she sent it, the story would no longer belong only to her. Across the aisle in 1C, Charlotte Kingsley sat stiffly, legs crossed, eyes forward, champagne untouched. She was still fuming, though her indignation now simmered beneath a porcelain facade. Her attempt to reclaim her usual seat had failed, and worse. She'd been publicly corrected. Charlotte turned toward the aisle, catching a glimpse of Ayla's screen. She smirked. "Must be updating your blog," she muttered under her breath. Ayla didn't even blink. "No, just a quick email to my legal team." Charlotte's lips tightened. In the rear of first class, Leo Sandoval was adding final touches to his edited video. He'd taken the liberty of overlaying captions, highlighting moments like Charlotte's "I always sit here," and the quiet exchange of glances between Captain Marshall Rhodes and the crew. His camera had caught it all. He turned to Cassandra Liu. "Think it's too much." She leaned over and watched the clip. "No," she said softly. "I think people need to see what bias looks like when it wears a smile." Back in the galley, Naomi Ellis poured a cup of chamomile tea with shaking hands. Her heart was still racing from the moment she knelt by Ayla. The weight of speaking up, however small, had left her both scared and exhilarated. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, only that she couldn't go back to how she was before. Eli Grant approached, his voice lower now, more deliberate. "You sure you're okay?" Naomi handed him the tea. "No, but I finally feel like I'm not just floating." He nodded slowly. "If this goes public," It won't be pretty for us. Maybe it's not supposed to be, she replied. As the plane cruised toward Halden Bay, Ayla finally hit send on her message. It was addressed to her general counsel, her head of communications, and critically, Evan Beach, the chairman of the Northwave Airlines board. The subject line was short request for emergency meeting in-flight incident report. Northwave 221 attached were photos of her ticket, her platinum status confirmation, and a video snippet from a fellow passenger she had just airdropped to herself Leo's footage. But it was the message body that cut the deepest. I was removed from my rightful seat by repeated coercion from cabin crew. Pressured to give way for a passenger whose only claim to the seat was habit and influence. I'm not only a paying platinum tier customer, I am also the founder and CEO of Nuvance AI, a key technology provider in Northwave's pending digital systems overhaul. I believe your team should know how your front line represents your brand. We will need to discuss the implications. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple unveiling of truth, and in Ayla's hands, truth carried weight. Evan Beach received the message in his corner office overlooking downtown Chicago. The glow of his 3-monitor setup reflected in his glasses as he read it once, then again. His blood ran cold. His assistant poked her head in, sensing the shift. "Everything all right?" "Sir, no." Evans said, "Cancel my lunch. Get legal. Now." Meanwhile, back on the flight, Ayla reached into her tote and pulled out a thin, well-worn leather journal. On the inside cover, a quote was written in flowing ink, "Power reveals more than it protects." It had been her grandmother's. She stared at the words for a long moment, thinking not about lawsuits or shareholders, but about every quiet instance of exclusion she had endured without camera phones or witnesses, of hotel lobbies where she was asked if she was lost, of boardrooms where assumptions followed her in before her name did. Today had been different, not because the discrimination was worse, but because this time the world was watching, and she had the tools to make it count. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain Rhodes, ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Halden Bay shortly. Please ensure your seats are upright and your belts fastened." The landing routine began, but for many on board, the journey had already changed course. Margot Pearson, seated just behind Ayla, leaned forward. "You didn't have to stand your ground like that. You know." Ayla turned. "I did." Margot smiled. Yes, you did, and I think we all just took a little more courage with us because you did." Ayla nodded once. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. In the final 10 minutes before wheels touched down, there was no applause, no grand declarations, only a plane full of people quietly absorbing what they'd just witnessed. The woman who refused to move, the system that tried to nudge her aside, the shifting weight of justice, pressing not loudly but firmly. The wheels kissed the runway with a dull screech, and Northwave Flight 221 taxied down the tarmac at Halden Bay International Airport. To most passengers, it was just another landing. But for those in first class, it felt like stepping off a stage after an unspoken performance, one they hadn't planned to witness, but couldn't unsee. Dr. Ayla Monroe remained in her seat, eyes scanning the final email confirmations. Her legal team had acknowledged her message. The Nuvance communications director had forwarded the first set of footage compilations. Everything was in motion. She closed her laptop, slowly, deliberately. Across from her, Charlotte Kingsley stared straight ahead. For the first time in years, no one offered to take her bag. The flight crew no longer hovered around her with their usual sycophancy. The invisible velvet rope had, for now, been cut. Charlotte knew it wasn't over. Women like her didn't fall easily. But, for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar pressing against her curated self-image accountability. The cabin lights flickered, signaling disembarkation. Passengers stood, murmurs soft but purposeful. Some glanced at Ayla, uncertain whether to nod in solidarity or out of sheer discomfort. Others simply watched. Naomi Ellis, the young attendant, stepped aside to let Ayla pass. Their eyes met. Naomi didn't speak. She just gave a subtle, shaky nod and apology, perhaps, or gratitude. Ayla returned the gesture. She didn't need anyone to bow or apologize. She just needed them to see, back inside the terminal. Ayla moved with ease. Her stride was neither rushed nor hesitant. Reporters hadn't arrived yet. This was the calm before the media firestorm, but she had no illusions. Her phone buzzed with notifications, hashtags already forming, mentions exploding. She wasn't viral yet, but the algorithm was sniffing blood. In the corner of the arrivals hall, Leo Sandoval handed a flash drive to a woman in a navy blazer. I got clean angles, full footage, audio clear. Upload it when I give the word. The woman nodded. It'll be up on 3 platforms before the hour's out. Leo checked his watch. Good. The world's about to learn what it means to earn first class. At Northwave's headquarters in Denver Heights, the boardroom was in full emergency mode. Evan Beach, the chairman, slammed his fist down on the table. You're telling me we forcibly displaced a black CEO who's also a primary stakeholder and tech partner out of a paid seat to accommodate? What a repeat flyer with a loud mouth. The legal counsel hesitated. It appears that's correct, sir. And the crew, Captain Marshall Rhodes, filed a preliminary report claiming the decision was made for operational harmony. Evan scoffed. So he chose harmony over legality and optics. A long silence. The head of public relations, Viola James, lifted her tablet. There's a trending video titled "First Class for the Familiar." Another's using "Monroe Not Moving." They're picking up traction, fast. Evan turned toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. We have hours. Maybe less. Get a statement drafted, and I want everyone on that flight identified, especially the passenger who filmed it. Viola nodded, and Dr. Monroe. She's not responding to our calls. Evan knew why. She didn't need to say a word yet. That night, in her suite overlooking the Halden Bay Marina, Ayla watched the world ignite. The first video had gone live. Footage from Leo's camera. Ayla calmly holding her boarding pass while Jessica Morrow, the flight service manager, pressed her to relocate. Charlotte's entitled sneer. Rhodes's chilling line. You should consider how unpleasant this flight can become. And finally, Ayla's steady voice. Do what you must. I will do what's right. The comment sections flooded. She's every woman who's ever been told to move. If that seat was paid for and reserved, what else do you need a different skin tone? No more excuses. This is systemic discrimination in heels and a uniform. Ayla scrolled, unread messages piling in, some from colleagues, some from strangers, some threatened violence, many offered solidarity. A headline flashed across her screen, Black Tech CEO removed from VIP seat Northwave Airlines under fire. She didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. She knew this wasn't victory. It was the first strike in a long, public war. Later that evening, Ayla sat by the window, wrapped in a cotton robe, her journal open. The silence of the room contrasted with the frenzy online. Her hand hesitated over the page. Then she began to write. They didn't know who I was. That should never have mattered. But now that they do, they'll learn what justice looks like quietly, firmly, and in full view. She paused. Her hand trembled for a moment, not from fear, but from the weight of what came next. Injustice had many faces. This time, she would give it a name. The morning after the landing, the first crack widened into a fissure. Social media had exploded overnight. Videos of Dr. Ayla Monroe's removal now trended in 7 countries. Hashtags like Monroe not moving, Privilege in first, and Northwave no more flooded every feed. At Northwave Airlines' headquarters in Denver Heights, the crisis team met before sunrise. The air in the boardroom was thick with panic. Evan Beach stood in front of a projection screen, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Over 4.2 million views. CNN, MSNBC, even Al Jazeera are running coverage. And I just got off the phone with 2 of our largest institutional investors. They're concerned. That's code for fix this or they pull out. The PR head, Viola James, looked pale. She still hasn't spoken. Just retweeted one of the video clips with the line, "The seat was mine, the silence is yours." That tweet alone has 500,000 shares. A junior analyst interrupted. Nervously, our stock dropped 6.7% by pre-market open. Beach closed his eyes and breathed through his nose. She's building a wave and we're standing on the shore with sandbags. Someone muttered. Why didn't we just fix this on the plane? The room fell quiet because it wasn't designed to be fixed. Not in a culture where power flowed toward the familiar, not the rightful, not when crew saw names, not credentials, and not when the system had quietly protected its own for far too long. Meanwhile, Ayla walked silently through a local cafe in Halden Bay, phone in hand. She hadn't slept. The faces of Naomi, Jessica, even Captain Rhodes kept flashing in her thoughts, not just for what they did, but why they did it. The easy compliance, the fear, the selective courage. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching a group of college students huddled over their phones. One gasped, "Oh my God, she's here." Another turned. Their eyes met hers. One girl mouthed, "Thank you," and tapped her heart. Ayla nodded, lips pressed thin. There was a responsibility now, one she hadn't asked for, but could not refuse. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Reva Dunn, her personal attorney. "The board is scrambling. Beach wants a call. Investors are reaching out to you directly now. You've got leverage. Use it carefully." Ayla stared at the message. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then pulled back. She needed time. And then came the email. From a name she hadn't seen in years, Rachel Linwood, a flight attendant from an internship flight when Ayla was just 22. A woman who had once quietly handed her a business card when a gate agent had questioned Ayla's ticket. The email read, "I saw the video. I never forgot what happened on your first flight to New York. You were just a student then. You didn't raise your voice, but you made people listen. I'm sorry you still have to do this. Let me know if I can help." Ayla's throat tightened. She remembered that flight vividly. A middle seat between two suited men who talked over her for hours. A meal skipped. A wrong name used 3 times. And Rachel, who'd bent down quietly and said, "Don't let them rewrite your story." Now, all these years later, the story had returned. At the same time, in a quiet corner of the Denver Heights Pilot Lounge, Captain Marshall Rhodes watched his own downfall unfold on loop. His colleagues avoided his gaze. The seniority that once earned nods of respect now only brought silence. He hadn't heard from Jessica Morrow, and Naomi Ellis had removed her social media accounts entirely. He replayed Ayla's voice on his phone, calm, measured, devastating. "I respect safety regulations, but I also respect the seat I reserved and paid for. I will not move simply because someone else is more comfortable with me gone." How had he missed it? The quiet power in her words, the precision. It wasn't defiance, it was dignity. He looked down at his reflection in his coffee, the epaulets on his shoulders suddenly heavier than ever. Was he losing everything for a moment he couldn't justify? No. He thought bitterly. Not just a moment. A pattern. Later that evening, Ayla sat on a panel live-streamed globally by The Verge, titled "Power and Prejudice at 30,000 Feet." She hadn't planned to speak, but the public silence was no longer viable. The pressure needed a release. When her turn came, she spoke slowly, eyes steady on the camera. "I didn't want to become a symbol. I wanted to be a passenger. But sometimes, life doesn't give us the quiet paths. I wasn't removed because of a mistake. I was removed because the system was designed to accommodate power, not fairness. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been told to shrink for someone else's comfort. I will not shrink." The video went viral before she left the building. Her inbox flooded. "You just spoke for all of us. My daughter watched your clip. She asked me why they tried to move you. I didn't know how to explain it. We're behind you. The wave was rising, but behind every uprising is a choice to lead from fire or to lead from grace." Ayla turned off her phone and whispered into the quiet of her hotel room. Not for revenge, for change. Tomorrow, she would send an ultimatum to Northwave's board, but tonight, she let the silence wrap her just for a moment longer. The storm had come, but she was ready to walk through it. The next morning, the world woke up to an inbox bomb. At exactly 7:03 a.m., Evan Beach, the board of Northwave Airlines, and select shareholders received an email from Dr. Ayla Monroe. It wasn't long, it wasn't angry, it was clean, professional, and lethal in its clarity. Subject: formal notice, shareholder inquiry, contractual reassessment, and ethical resolution request. It began with a single line. "This is no longer about a seat. It is about systemic practice." Ayla laid out her conditions. 1. Immediate suspension and formal investigation of Jessica Morrow, Naomi Ellis, and Captain Marshall Rhodes for misconduct and policy violation. 2. A public apology from Northwave Airlines acknowledging the discriminatory treatment. 3. Independent review of Northwave's VIP service policies with equity oversight. 4. Termination of discriminatory staff if findings confirmed by review. 5. A 30-day deadline to announce internal reform or face public withdrawal of her 17. 5% stake and cancellation of Nuvance AI's pending $80 million contract for service optimization. The final sentence turned corporate muscle into jelly. Should these terms be ignored or delayed, I will go public. The cost of silence, for me, is higher than the cost of withdrawal. Back at Northwave HQ, panic metastasized into desperation. The airline's AI modernization project, led by Nuvance AI, had been poised to place them ahead of competitors by a decade. Cutting-edge algorithms for in-flight personalization, real-time bias mitigation, adaptive crew management. Losing Ayla wouldn't just mean bad press, it would mean technological obsolescence. In the executive boardroom, Beach paced, "She's cornered us. This isn't just about optics anymore. If we lose Monroe, we lose our future." PR lead Viola James rubbed her temples. "We could issue a partial statement, offer an apology without naming names." "No," Beach snapped. "Not after that footage. The bribes, the threats. You think she doesn't have more?" A murmur of quiet assent rippled around the table. They all knew. Ayla wasn't bluffing. Meanwhile, Ayla stood alone in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows at her Halden Bay hotel. Her eyes tracked the slow flight path of a departing plane in the sky, disappearing into soft clouds. She'd done the hard part, sending the message. Now came the harder part, waiting. Her assistant, Troy Bell, knocked and entered. "We've had 12 interview requests, 3 board invitations from other airlines, and 1 call from the Secretary of Transportation." Ayla blinked. "The Secretary wants to discuss service bias. Says your case is becoming a national example." Ayla turned away. Her voice was soft. "I never wanted to be an example. Just a person." Troy paused. "You are. Ayla. You just happen to be a person who speaks for a lot of others who couldn't." She nodded once. The burden felt heavier today, but necessary. Later that afternoon, as shareholders reviewed Ayla's demands, a very different conversation was happening in a quiet HR office on level 12 of Northwave's HQ. Naomi Ellis sat in a simple chair across from the airline's internal ethics investigator. Her hands trembled in her lap. "Why didn't you speak up?" "Naomi." She swallowed hard. "Because I've done it before, and no one listened. I got reprimanded once for refusing a reassignment after a VIP asked for someone else. It was coded language, but the message was clear." The investigator leaned forward. "Did you see or hear anything specific on Flight 221 that supports Dr. Monroe's complaint?" Naomi hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I saw Charlotte Kingsley pass money to Jessica Morrow. I heard Captain Rhodes tell Dr. Monroe, 'This will go badly for you if you keep resisting.' I heard her say, calmly, 'I won't move.'" She never raised her voice. Silence stretched. Naomi's voice was small, and I did nothing. That same evening, in his home office, Captain Marshall Rhodes replayed the videos again, over and over. The shame curled tighter each time. What haunted him wasn't the footage, but Ayla's calm gaze. She hadn't flinched when security stood over her. She hadn't cowered when he raised his voice. She had looked him in the eye and spoken the truth, and he had chosen power over principle. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. Jessica. Her voice was brittle. "Yeah, I think we need to talk before they make it official." A pause. "Yeah, we do." The next morning, as the press gathered outside Northwave's glass tower in Denver Heights, a formal statement went live. It was sharper than expected. Northwave Airlines acknowledges the mishandling of events on Flight 221. We are deeply sorry for the mistreatment of Dr. Ayla Monroe, a valued customer and industry leader. Effective immediately. We have placed 3 employees on administrative leave pending full investigation and have committed to an external equity audit of all first-class service policies. We thank Dr. Monroe for her courage in bringing this matter to light. Public response was immediate and divided. Some applauded, others called it too little, too late. But the damage had already embedded itself in public consciousness. Ayla watched the broadcast quietly in her room. No satisfaction, just a slow breath, eyes steady. They didn't fire anyone yet, but they admitted the truth. That alone was a shift. Hours later, an encrypted message arrived from Rachel Linwood, the former flight attendant. I saw the announcement. I cried for what it cost you and what it might save for others. You held the line. I'm proud of you. Ayla stared at the message, then typed back, "Thank you. But this is only the beginning." The internal clock on Dr. Ayla Monroe's phone ticked past noon. She hadn't eaten. The coffee Troy left had gone cold hours ago, untouched. Her eyes remained fixed on a single frame. Paused mid-video Charlotte Kingsley. Her hand mid-air, the bribe clear, the smirk unmistakable. It wasn't anger that kept Ayla still. It was the weight of choice. Should she push forward and trigger a full shareholder rebellion, or let Northwave's statement stand as enough and let it quietly fade outside? Protesters had gathered near Northwave's headquarters, mostly young people, holding handmade signs. She paid, she earned, she was expelled. We all deserve first-class respect. Bias isn't just bad service, it's violence in silence. Ayla stared at the screen. "Should I call the press?" Troy asked from the doorway. "No," Ayla said quietly. "Not yet. I want them to speak first. I want to know if Northwave will listen before being forced. But you said I know what I said. But I also said I'm not here for revenge." Troy hesitated, then nodded and stepped out, gently closing the door behind him. Meanwhile, inside Northwave's executive suite, the air was tight with urgency. "Her silence is worse than a press conference," said PR Director Viola James. "The longer she waits, the more it builds. Everyone's watching for her next move." Evan Beach paced beside the whiteboard cluttered with crisis strategies. "We gave her the apology," he snapped. "She wanted accountability. 3 suspensions are underway, but no terminations," Viola said. "And your apology didn't say the word discrimination even once." Beach froze. "You think I should have admitted to institutional bias in public on record. Not admitting won't make it disappear," Viola replied, and now she holds the cards. Again. Beach knew it. He knew the next move wasn't his anymore. That night, Ayla attended a private virtual panel hosted by the Institute for Ethical Innovation. She didn't plan to speak, but her name in the attendance list had drawn attention. Halfway through the session, the moderator asked gently, "Monroe, would you care to share your perspective on what accountability looks like in real time?" Ayla took a slow breath, turned on her camera. "I used to think accountability meant acknowledgement. Now, I know it means a recalibration." The panel hushed. "When a system hurts someone, it's not enough to apologize. You have to ask yourself what made this possible in the first place. And if you can't name it, you'll repeat it." Her voice didn't rise, but every word landed. "I don't want Northwave punished. I want it reformed. Not just for me, for whoever sits in 2A next time." The following morning, the media had picked up the panel clip. It went viral in under 6 hours. Monroe doesn't want retribution. She wants recalibration. The Atlantic headline, Dr. Ayla Monroe is teaching corporate America how to atone. Business Insider public sentiment swelled further. People weren't just outraged, now they were inspired. In Halden Bay, Ayla walked the edge of the beach, barefoot, phone silent for once. The waves moved in slow rhythm. Her shoulders finally softened. She thought of her father, who once told her when she was 12 and excluded from a class trip because of capacity limits. You're never too young to make someone uncomfortable with the truth. Back then, she'd cried. Now, she stood at the helm of a social reckoning. Her phone buzzed. She checked it. A single-line message from Northwave's board. We're ready to meet your terms fully. Ayla closed her eyes and exhaled. The emergency board meeting took place via encrypted video. Everyone showed up. Ayla appeared not in anger, but in quiet command, flanked by her legal counsel Reva Dunn and 2 representatives from Equity Scope. The auditing firm Ayla had nominated for reform monitoring. Evan Beach looked older, smaller. He cleared his throat. Dr. Monroe, on behalf of the board, we acknowledge the failures not just procedural, but systemic. He paused. We've voted unanimously to terminate Jessica Morrow, Naomi Ellis, and Captain Rhodes effective immediately. In addition, we are appointing an external oversight committee to review all VIP protocols. Ayla didn't blink, and Ms. Kingsley Beach hesitated. She's not an employee, but she's a long-term contracted legal counsel for the board. Ayla replied, one who offered a bribe and triggered this spiral. Her contract will be terminated. Ayla nodded once, and the reforms Beach turned the floor to Viola James, who outlined a 6-month transformation plan, co-developed with Ayla's team, independent reporting systems, unconscious bias testing, live passenger feedback, rotation-based crew selection to prevent favoritism. When it was done, Ayla leaned forward. I accept your actions, but I'm not stepping back. Eyes widened. I will retain my stake. I will remain your largest shareholder, and I will install an ethics observer on the board, effective immediately. Beach swallowed. You're staying. Yes, Ayla said, because transformation requires presence, and I'm not leaving until this sky belongs to everyone. As the meeting ended, Reva leaned in. You did it. Ayla shook her head. We just began. The following morning, the world felt different, not because it had fully changed, but because the illusion of normalcy had been shattered. Northwave Airlines, once the epitome of polished prestige, found itself under a new lens. Passengers, staff, journalists, and social media watchdogs were no longer content with glamour shots of wine glasses in first class. They wanted to know who belongs here and who decides, and they wanted to know it because of one woman, Dr. Ayla Monroe. In the days that followed, Ayla's name was everywhere, not splashed across tabloids or filtered into fluff interviews, but cited in op-eds, business ethics panels, and congressional hearings on consumer rights. She hadn't asked for this spotlight, but now that it burned bright, she refused to step out of it until the shadows beneath were addressed. At Halden Bay University, Professor Langston opened his Leadership in Crisis seminar with a new case study, Monroe v. Northwave. Students debated not just legality, but morality. One sophomore raised her hand. I don't know if I could have stayed that calm, she said. The grace, the poise, that's the kind of leadership they don't teach, but we need it. Back at Northwave's internal headquarters, the new normal was uncomfortable but necessary. Suspended employees had been officially dismissed. An internal email acknowledged the breach of policy, misuse of power, and stated, for the first time in company history, racism and privilege, whether overt or subtle, will not be tolerated in our organization at any level. That email had been approved by Evan Beach, who sat quietly in his office later that day. Rereading Ayla's proposed reform charter, he wasn't used to this feeling. The unease of not being in control, the humility of not having the final say, and, strangely, it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like awakening. Meanwhile, Charlotte Kingsley had vanished from the legal circuit, her name now synonymous with white privilege unchecked. No press release, no denial, just silence and the fading echo of a smirk that had once ruled the cabin of Flight 227. Ayla returned to her home in Kendall Heights, the city she loved, where her company, Nuvance AI, had first taken root in a rented garage. Her assistant, Troy, met her at the gate. "You okay?" he asked, offering a small smile. Ayla looked at the garden, overgrown in her absence. She breathed in the soft scent of sage. "I'm tired," she said honestly, "but I'm at peace. Inside." She poured herself tea, sat in the living room, and finally allowed the quiet to hold her. That's when her phone buzzed again. She hesitated. Another email from Viola James at Northwave. Subject line, an invitation, Dr. Monroe. "We are preparing to launch a new initiative, Every Seat, Every Story. We would be honored if you'd help us shape its message and its soul." Ayla stared at the words. There was a time when she might have dismissed it as corporate PR fluff. Now, she knew better. If you don't guide the change, someone else will direct the narrative, and not always in the right direction. The very next week, Ayla stood on a quiet stage at Northwave's Pilot Training Center, addressing their newest recruits. It wasn't a press event, no cameras, no media frenzy, just people learning how to fly with their hands and their hearts. "I want to tell you something about Seat 2A, she began, voice soft. "It's not about upholstery or wine lists or priority boarding. It's about the person who sits there, whoever they are, their dignity, their right to be seen and served without suspicion or subtraction." A few heads nodded slowly. Some scribbled notes, others just watched her, eyes wide. And when the day comes that someone tells you that person doesn't belong here, I want you to remember justice isn't silent. It speaks through you. On the way out, a young black trainee approached her, his voice quiet. "Dr. Monroe, my mom, she watched your story on the news. She said she never thought she'd see someone like her teach the sky a lesson." Ayla's throat tightened. "Tell your mom," she said gently, "the sky's for her too." In the months that followed, the ripple became a wave. Northwave became the first airline to mandate equity leadership rotation, where every crew leader would be trained in social awareness and diversity conflict resolution. They partnered with Nuvance AI to deploy real-time bias flagging in service reviews. A small change, but a measurable one. And Ayla, she kept showing up. She wasn't a martyr. She wasn't a savior. She was simply someone who didn't give up her seat. And in doing so, she gave the rest of us a place to start. When Dr. Ayla Monroe stepped off her next flight, Flight 488 from Kendall Heights to Halden Bay, there were no glares, no forced apologies, No smug passengers clinging to privilege like a second passport. There was only recognition. Not the kind that asked for selfies or spoken hashtags, but the quiet nods of flight attendants who met her eyes with respect. Not resentment. The subtle thank you whispered by a gate agent, the glance of understanding exchanged with a woman 2 rows ahead, baby in her arms, exhaustion in her bones. The culture had shifted, and yet Ayla remained vigilant, because even after revolutions, prejudice can linger like dust behind a polished frame. On the ground, change was rolling out faster than most corporations dared imagine. Northwave Airlines launched the Every Seat, Every Story campaign, a customer-first initiative placing the value of lived experience above dollar signs or frequent flyer tiers. They introduced internal audits, community-led oversight councils, and even open-door forums where current and former staff could speak freely about exclusionary practices. And at the heart of every presentation stood Ayla, not as a mascot, not as a miracle, but as a catalyst. Behind the scenes, the road was far from smooth. The board still had skeptics. Conservative investors quietly grumbled. A few tried to pressure CEO Evan Beach to stabilize the brand narrative by sidelining Ayla's involvement. "She's a disruptor," they whispered, to which Evan replied, without raising his voice, "No, she's the reason we're still in business." Even he knew the truth. Ayla hadn't destroyed Northwave. She'd saved it from itself. But Ayla wasn't immune to conflict, especially within. Some nights, long after meetings ended, she'd sit alone on her balcony in Kendall Heights, sipping mint tea, wondering if she had done enough. The public praised her. Employees thanked her. But what about the women who never made it to seat 2A, the ones removed quietly, without an audience, or too tired to fight? Her phone buzzed one evening with a message from an unknown number. "Thank you. I used to fly Northwave, haven't in 3 years. You gave me the courage to book again." Ayla stared at the screen. Tears didn't fall, but something inside softened. Meanwhile, Naomi Ellis, the dismissed junior flight attendant, sat in a mandatory civil equity course in Denver. Her jaw clenched as the instructor played the infamous video again. The scene of Ayla standing calm, Eli hovering with forced authority, Captain Rhodes ready to remove her. Naomi watched herself. She didn't like what she saw. Not just the silence, but the way her body angled away from Ayla, her eyes darting for approval. The instructor paused the video. "Naomi, what do you think now?" Naomi hesitated, then spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was being professional, but now I see. I was being afraid, and fear doesn't excuse complicity." Captain Marshall Rhodes, once revered as a flight leader, now spent his days teaching aerodynamics at a local aviation college. The scandal had closed the cockpit door on his career, but opened others he never considered. He invited Ayla one day, unannounced, to guest lecture on ethics in service leadership. She accepted not because she wanted to, but because she believed people could change when given honest paths to do so. After her talk, Rhodes stayed behind. "I failed you," he said, gaze steady. "You failed yourself," Ayla replied. He nodded, took it like a pilot takes turbulence head on. The greatest shift came, not through headlines or policies, but in the quiet hearts of passengers. On Flight 621, a middle-aged white man noticed a young black woman being questioned unnecessarily by a gate agent. Instead of averting his eyes, he stepped forward. "She's with me," he said, "and even if she weren't, this isn't okay." On Flight 902, a Latina flight attendant stood firm when a VIP tried to pressure her into reseating another passenger. "Our job is to protect dignity, not favoritism," she said. On Flight 7017, a crew member openly apologized to a passenger she'd once overlooked because now they had the training to recognize unconscious bias. These weren't grand gestures, but they were the future unfolding. And yet, Ayla still felt the weight of legacy. One night, while preparing a keynote for the Global Ethics in Transport Summit, she found herself staring at a blank screen. What more could she say? What hadn't already been said? Then she remembered her grandmother, who had once told her, "The hardest journeys don't end when the world changes. They end when your heart stops needing the world to change for you to keep going." And Ayla understood. She wasn't just speaking to airlines anymore. She was speaking to every system that seated people based on what they looked like, instead of who they were. At the summit, her speech began not with fanfare, but with a question. Who did you ignore last time you flew silence? Then she continued. Was it the woman juggling 2 kids alone, the elderly man you rushed past, the brown-skinned passenger you assumed didn't belong in first class? Another pause. I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to remind you that seat next to you. It's not just upholstery. It's a symbol. It tells a story. And you help write it. When she finished, the room didn't erupt in applause. It exhaled. Because that's what truth does. It lets us breathe again. It began with a seat. 2C. Leather-trimmed, front row, window side quiet, coveted, routinely passed down like an heirloom among Northwave Airlines Platinum Elite. But on that winter morning, Dr. Ayla Monroe had occupied it, not because of favor or connections, but because she had paid for it, earned it, and booked it fair and square. What followed reshaped an entire company and, quietly, the conscience of a country. But here's the part no one talks about. Even after justice is served, the silence that follows can feel unbearably loud. Months later, Ayla sat quietly in that same seat again. The flight route had been reinstated Kendall Heights to Halden Bay, and she'd chosen it on purpose. Not for nostalgia, not for ceremony, but to prove to herself that healing didn't mean forgetting. She didn't expect to cry, but when she sank into the seat's curve, something in her chest uncoiled. The cabin looked the same, brushed steel fixtures, white ambient lighting, polite murmurs from the crew, yet everything was different, and everyone knew why. The flight attendant assigned to first class approached cautiously. She was young, no older than 23, with box braids tied back, name tag shining under cabin lights. "Dr. Monroe," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you." Ayla looked up, surprised. For what? The attendant's voice caught, just slightly. For making this job feel safe for people like me. They held each other's gaze for a moment, one long, wordless transfer of courage. Ayla smiled. "You earned this seat," she said, and in that moment, both women knew so had she. While the public had moved on to new scandals and headlines, the culture at Northwave Airlines had been transformed from within. Training was no longer a checkbox. It was an experience built not to appease, but to awaken. Executives didn't just issue apologies, they sat through sessions, listened to passenger testimonies, studied their own decision-making. Every employee, from cabin crew to corporate had to reflect on their role in the now infamous Monroe incident, and slowly, the tone of the company changed. Passengers noticed, so did investors. Evan Beach, the airline's CEO, became one of Ayla's fiercest allies, not because of PR pressure or market threats, but because he had watched his own daughter, a shy biracial teen, cry after reading the news the day Ayla was removed. She said, "Daddy, would they have made me move too?" Evan had recalled one night in a boardroom. That was the moment he stopped seeing Ayla as a crisis. He started seeing her as the mirror his company had long avoided. As part of Northwave's agreement with Ayla's firm, Nuvance AI, a live bias sensing feedback system was implemented across all major routes. Cabin crew could now monitor passenger treatment trends, interaction heat maps, and onboard service disparities in real time. Discrimination could no longer hide behind politeness. The system didn't shame, it guided. It didn't accuse, it revealed. When one junior attendant accidentally skipped beverage service to 2 Hispanic passengers in row 6A and 6B, the system flagged it. Training followed. Apologies were made. Respect was restored. It was proof that technology, when built by people who understand injustice, doesn't just automate, it equalizes. Outside the airline world, Ayla's impact rippled far wider. Luxury hotels began reviewing their loyalty policies. Corporate boards invited her to speak not just about inclusion, but about courage, process, and healing. Even government transportation agencies contacted her to consult on federal anti-discrimination reforms. And yet, she kept her tone humble. She wasn't here to become a symbol. She was here to build a better world. But Ayla's inner world wasn't always as composed as her speeches. Some nights, she replayed the cabin confrontation in her mind. The coldness in Charlotte Kingsley's voice, the weighted silence from crew members like Naomi Ellis, the smirk of Captain Rhodes, masking insecurity with false authority, and she wondered what if no one had recorded it. What if Sierra Vance, the young passenger who leaked the footage, hadn't been there? Would she have been just another quiet removal, just another woman of color asked to move as a courtesy? That fear never left, but instead of breaking her, it honed her. In a closed-door shareholder summit months after the incident, Ayla stood before a crowd of stone-faced executives, many of whom still didn't understand why an airline should care so much about bias. "Let me be clear," she said calmly. This was never just about a seat. She let the silence settle. This was about whether your systems protect dignity or strip it away. About whether power is something you hold or something you use to uplift. A hand rose at the back. A skeptical investor asked, "And you really believe we can undo centuries of systemic thinking with some diversity program?" Ayla didn't flinch. "No," she said, "but we can stop making excuses, and we can start here." Before the flight to Halden Bay landed, a quiet moment unfolded. The same young attendant who had greeted her earlier returned to Ayla's seat. She held a note, folded carefully, written in blue ink. "I found this slipped under the galley door," she whispered. Ayla unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, the lines unsure. "I watched what happened to you. I didn't speak up. I was afraid. I'm sorry, but I'm trying to be better." Naomi Ayla closed her eyes, not to cry, but to honor the truth, because justice wasn't about punishment. It was about growth, about letting even those who failed find their way back. As the plane taxied to the gate, Ayla looked out the window, not at the skyline, but at the reflection of herself. Not the CEO, not the viral figure, just Ayla, the woman who had refused to move, who had lost nothing except the silence that once kept the world comfortable. Sometimes it takes just one moment to reveal everything that's wrong. A seat, a silence, a smirk. What happened to Dr. Ayla Monroe was more than a policy failure. It was a mirror, a reflection of how power is still distributed, how bias still hides behind protocol, and how silence still protects the wrong people. But she didn't yell, she didn't threaten, she didn't break. She stood still, and in doing so, forced an entire corporation to move. Because courage isn't loud, it's consistent, and justice doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it shows up in boardrooms, in training rooms, in quiet apologies written on folded paper. We live in a world where discrimination is often repackaged as procedure. But Ayla's story reminds us when we normalize disrespect, we institutionalize injustice. So today, we don't just remember what happened on that plane, we honor every person who's been told, subtly or outright, that they don't belong. And to those still afraid to speak up, let this story be a promise you're not alone. If this moved you, even just a little like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more real, raw, and necessary stories. Because this isn't the last seat that will be challenged, but it may be the first that truly changed something.